I don't think I have any magic orders. Just to confirm, I'm going to be your judge. My name is Brian. I think most of the guys here know me. And yeah, nothing really much. I'm just looking forward to a great round.
Oh, thank you, Brian. We are glad to have you. Let's, in that respect, have the first speaker from proposition to start the case of Prof. Here.
Am I audible?
You're very audible.
Okay, let me just set my timer.
Okay, guys, time yourselves, but Judge Brian is also timing you. Also will be, but time yourself. It's a very necessary thing.
Okay, confirming one more time if I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, so please type your POIs if you have any in the chat space. Please don't badger my speech. I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. In the ever-evolving landscape of American politics, one key figure, Trump, has always found himself at the center of debates, controversies, and political storms. Yet too often he has been used as a scapegoat by selfish Democrats to do their bidding, and yesterday's decision was no different. We don't believe in court decisions that are unconstitutional and politically motivated, thus we are proud to propose two burdens for side proposition in this debate. One, to show you why it is unjustified on 3 grounds, principally, constitutionally, and consequentially. There are 2 arguments that we're going to bring forth. One is about political manipulation, and secondly, about the legal issues with the decision, which can be impacted by summary very well in her second speech. But before that, 4 broad pieces of characterization and framing. Firstly, let's look at the basis of the whole thing, the clause. This is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the United States. It has 4 things inside it. 1, that a person who has taken an oath of office and has lived and has served and has engaged in an insurrection or a rebellion can constitutionally they can bar him from holding another public office. This can only be overturned by a ratification by 2/3 of the Congress, both the House and the Senate. Note one thing, Chair, that the Congress is currently dominated by Republicans with a Republican speaker. The second thing I want to characterize is about the Supreme Court's decision yesterday. 3 things. 1, Donald Trump is not allowed to be on the ballot, specifically in the Colorado primary. The second thing is that he can still easily be on other ballots in other primaries, such as to say the other 49 states. But the third thing is that it still does not stop him from being on the final ballot of the eventual presidential race. The third thing I want to talk about is the US politics as we know it as a whole. 4 things. 1, Trump is still heads-on favorite to win this primary regardless, because he's currently holding a 60% majority in terms of the predictions. Secondly, this has been started by an anti-Trump politicians who are politically against him. Third thing, that this kind of thing has been tried in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and all these Supreme Courts have denied it. Fourth thing, Trump in recent years has been at the center of a series of political attacks by the DOJ, attacks on his businesses, attacks on his sons, Democrats who have tried to impeach him twice. He has been arrested and let go. Note these things. All these things have not been proven guilty. That's one thing we can note. The fourth thing I want to talk about is this whole so-called insurrection in quotes. 4 things about this. 1, that Trump rejected the results of the 2020 elections. He told a group of people to fight for American democracy. And this is not the first time that this has happened. This has happened in many elections, such as Al Gore in 1999, when he demanded supporters to fight. This has happened many times when a president or someone who has lost the election has challenged and has demanded that they do not certify the results on January the 6th. The only difference here is that supporters went ahead and went too far to storm the building. What does this mean? Trump is not directly accountable, or Trump has done something which has been done in the past. This is a preemptive response to the claims that he's the one who caused it or is the one that directly led it, because it's not true. Why this is not true is that because it is due to the glory. It's because that he only let free speech. What is our stance in this debate? That this action is not justified principally, democratically, or judicially, and should only be overturned and will be overturned. First argument is about political manipulation. What are the premises of this argument? Two premises. One, the US political system is bipartisan and is against Trump in all ways. Second thing is that Democrats hold a firm grip on the White House and the Senate. What is our stance on this argument? This move is politically incentivized and thus not justified. There are two layers of analysis I'm going to give you. Firstly, Trump has been found over a series of attacks since when he entered office, and thus it's a move by Democrats. I have two reasons to show you to this one. The DOJ, or the Department of Justice, is led by a Democratic secretary in charge of the justice. The second thing I want to show you is that the ones who have influenced his impeachment and all the things that he have gone against are Democrats they themselves. This is linked to the second layer of analysis, is that they're simply doing this to make him lose ground in the race. Why is this? Three reasons. One, because these people know very well that Congress can easily ratify and change this decision. Why? Because Congress currently holds 2/3, and Congress is currently Republican dominated, which means at any time this ratification can still be overturned. Secondly, everyone knows Donald Trump will still be on the presidential ballot, and he will still most likely win the Republican domination. Remember, this kind of ratification or this kind of amendment is a direct bid for someone to remove you from ever getting a chance to hold office. But the Democrats and the Supreme Court very well knows that even though this thing is passed, Donald Trump will still be on the presidential ballot. Why? Because he will still win the Republican nomination in all the other 49 states. What does this mean? The importance of this argument shows that most likely they know that Donald Trump will still be there, and it's just a move for them to actually get him to lose ground in the race and actually build their bid for the Democratic domination. The impacts of this argument are two. One, potential backlash by pro-Trump Republicans. You have to know two things: that they currently have a majority in the Congress, and thus they can stop bills, they can halt the system, which we have seen in the past they are very capable and willing to do. That's why the US system shut down for 3 weeks as they were looking for a Republican speaker. And they know that it is unjustified, and yet they are pro-Trump. The second thing is that there are more likely divisions within Congress and less chances of a bipartisan policies, because you're halting this kind of working together, because you are directly politically attacking the person who leads their party. The second argument is about the legal issues with this decision. This thing is based on one premise, that there's a broad interpretation of an insurrection and what they call staging it. There are two pieces of framing I'm going to do. One, what an insurrection looks like. It looks like a violent uprising against an authority or a government, like an attempted coup. This is easily seen with the Wagner uprising or the Wagner insurrection. This is a clear contradiction to what people think this Donald Trump thing was. This was simply a violent upstaging of people with free speech demanding for justice. What that proves to you is that this thing is legally having issues, which is going to be explained by my second speaker. But what we believe in and our stance is that this is principally, constitutionally, and morally unjustified. Thank you.
All right, the House thanks affirmative speaker number 1 for that speech. May we now welcome the first speaker from the opposition side to open up the case of the opposition team. Here.
Hi, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, just give me a minute and I set my time. Okay, so I still. Hi, am I still audible?
Yes, Rama, you're loud and clear.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hobbes says that human beings are inherently evil. That is to say, they always do things to protect themselves without looking at other individuals who are going to be harmed by those particular things. That is why we see the Germans pushing neo-Nazism and different individuals like the Jews being killed. This necessarily means that the government is a ministry that then exists to protect citizens from any potential harm or threat. What does this then mean to this debate? For any leader to rule the state, they have to not only be wise, but they also have to be willing to stand up and stop any forms of discourse that are existing in order to promote unity within this society, which Donald Trump then lacks. We object to Donald Trump actually standing for presidency. We support the Supreme Court. A few points of setup within this speech. 3 things. Firstly, why do we support something? We support something under two circumstances. Firstly, when it brings more benefits to society, and B, when it protects the stakeholders in this debate, which are the citizens. B, what is the law and what does it then stand for? We tell you that the law exists to protect individuals from perpetuating harm onto each other. This looks like from perpetuating harm into each other. And that is why the law is there to literally legitimize the government in all instances. Two things to then note on it. One, no individual is then above the law. That is to say, for any individual who commits any particular crime, they then have to face any necessary precautions to it. But also, secondly, we tell you that when the law is breached, or when different individuals who commit crimes are not held accountable for their crimes, it then creates loopholes within the criminal justice system. And when loopholes are then created within the criminal justice system, it then leads to delegitimizing of the state, which is something that then becomes harmful. But also, finally, what is the nature of presidency of the United States in of itself? We tell you that the United States impacts a lot of people within society. This inherently means that all actions that they necessarily do, actions that are carried out by the United States, have a big impact on different citizens across the globe. That is why we see when the US pulled out of Afghanistan, the Taliban then came back immediately. We tell that the US does a lot of things and its policies then affect a lot of individuals, but then who heads these policies? The person who heads these policies is the president. That then necessarily means that this person has to be fit and this person has to be able to sort of pass an agenda that is going to be beneficial to all citizens. Two arguments then in our speeches today. Firstly, we're going to show you the effectivity of the criminal justice system and how it is solved on our side of the house. And secondly, on the negative precedents that their side of the house then necessarily elicits. But first of all, let me move on to engagement, right? We get two major things from side proposition. Firstly, we get an idea on how Trump is not directly accountable for the particular things that happened within that sort of uprising, right? They tell us the only justification they give us is that his supporters are the ones who actually carried out this particular act, so he's not accountable. Two things. We tell you that we think that the fact that he instigated these people with that sort of hate speech, and he instigated these people to come and fight and like to storm the Capitol, it then holds him accountable. That is why we held Hitler accountable for the Germans fighting against like the whole world, or for the Germans killing a lot of Jews, right? He was their leader. So a leader is an individual who then carries all the burdens of each and every person there. So this particular instance, we then think he then becomes directly accountable for the actions that happened on that particular day. Secondly, we get an idea on like how there's political manipulation that exists within the status quo, with like firstly, Trump facing a lot of attacks, but also secondly, Democrats not wanting him and Democrats knowing that he's basically going to win the election. Two responses. We think that the reason why different individuals then attack Donald Trump in status quo is because Donald Trump has very stupid policies in many instances. Notice how he even started up a policy of like building a wall. Most of these policies are normally controversial and people are just always expressing their views on those policies. This then does not stand because the whole idea of a democracy being there is to allow people to express their views, and people have the right to express their views against the different policies that he then implements that are not actually good within the society. But also secondly, we think that all evidence then exists against him leading this particular thing or doing this particular bad things. For example, that storming of the Capitol. At this particular instance, it then leads this argument then doesn't stand on this debate. Now, moving on to our first argument, which is basically on the criminal justice system. The premise of this argument is that each and every individual is answerable to the law once they commit a particular crime. What does this look like? This looks like public protection and government seeking out to public from these perpetuators and from the bad things that these people have done. Secondly, it looks like incarceration, governments putting arrest to those individuals who have carried out these bad acts. It looks like deterrence, individuals being held accountable for what they do, which necessarily pushes other individuals from doing those particular things that these people who have been held accountable have literally done before. The claim of this argument is that Donald Trump has been a perpetrator of violence within the society. This is seen with like the different events, even him leading like the storming the US Capitol, which actually led to a lot of casualties within status quo. What is the impact of this particular argument? We tell you that on their side of the house, if we then oppose this particular thing, firstly, it leads to no deterrence because individuals still stay in society doing these particular bad acts, knowing that even if we do them, we can still run for presidency, we can still get these high posts in government. Secondly, protect the time, I won't take you. Secondly, we tell you that it then spoils the image of the criminal justice system. Notice that letting Donald Trump rule or letting him run for power when he has been an instigator of violence yet it is a democracy that is supposed to unite different individuals, then goes against the whole idea of the criminal justice system as it stands, right? At this particular instance, the image of the Supreme Court then becomes bad. When the image of the Supreme Court then becomes bad, citizens then lose hope in it, which is something that is bad. We think it is inherently wrong to then allow him to run for president.
All right, the House thanks O1 for that fine speech. May we now welcome the second proposition speaker to extend the case of the affirmative team. Here.
Okay, so can I confirm audibility?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
All right, so I'm going to set my timer. Okay, so I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, in the whole case that opposition actually gives us in today's debate, clearly they fail to understand what our first speaker comes and tells you about, like how, like the whole idea of how he characterizes this insurrection, right? But then secondly, they don't understand what's the difference between like instigating or even staging such demonstrations, right? But then first thing first, the debate is not clearly about like how do we actually give accountability to criminal justice, but then it's rather the debate is more about, is the decision of the Colorado Supreme Court actually justified to remove Donald Trump from the state's presidential primary ballot. But then first thing first, I'm going to do a little engagement and then rebuttals and then finally show you as to why we think we clearly oppose this such feeble decision at the end of the day. First and foremost, what does team opposition come and tell us? Team opposition comes and tells us, you know what, at a point in time, we think that we're supposed to actually support this decision where it actually benefits the citizens. I will actually answer that throughout my speech. But then first and foremost, the greatest thing they actually claim about is that they're trying to answer the whole idea of accountability, right? But then, Chair, we come and tell you from our first speech, and like in the whole idea of characterization, that this insurrection or like this sort of riot was actually not Donald Trump's fault, right? We show you that he actually instigated it. What does that mean? It means that he actually talked to his supporters, and probably he didn't have the whole idea of him actually telling the supporters to go stage the Capitol. The whole idea for them to actually go ahead and stage it. That clearly shows that it's actually legally wrong and not even justified for Donald Trump to actually go ahead and probably face the consequences at the end of the day. Clearly does, like, what does that mean? It means that if I seek for justice, just like what it happened like in 1991, it doesn't mean that once I speak up about like if I need justice from like my supporters, that doesn't mean that I'm supposed to actually be shut, or probably since my supporters probably did actually undertook an irrational step, that doesn't mean that Trump should actually be held accountable. But then showing you that, we show you that this insurrection actually wasn't done by Trump. And then with that, it means that their accountability or their whole idea of deterrence should actually not be credited in today's debate. Why? We show you that this person or Trump actually is not a perpetrator for violence, or he's not the one who actually led the storming of the Capitol riot. And with that, we clearly show you like why this court decision to actually remove Donald Trump is actually constitutionally not justified at the end of the day. And then clearly, Chair, we clearly tell you that at the end of the day, what we try to achieve in today's debate is the Colorado Supreme Court decision to remove Donald Trump from this state's presidential primary ballot, justified or not, probably politically or even at the end of the day, morally justified. So what does Team Affirmative continue and tell us? Apart from the accountability that I try to engage them, whereby we don't see any sort of accountability that should actually hold Trump, because he's not actually the one who's behind the crime. Of that, my first speaker comes and tell you that there's been a great sort of political manipulation in the United States. That is them actually attacking him in constant political attacks, attacking his people, like probably even his assets at the end of the day. So with that case, it means that due to the high increments of this political manipulation, it clearly shows you that it clearly shows you that at a point in time, Trump should not actually be accountable, and we clearly say that team opposition's whole idea of accountability and deterrence should actually not be credited. And then secondly, we clarify to you what's the difference between instigating or talking for the sake to receive justice versus staging it, which team opposition does not understand throughout the characterization our first speaker gives us. But then secondly, we cannot tell you from our first, back to our argumentation as team affirmative. What does my first speaker come and tell you? My first speaker comes and tells you that, hey, Trump actually has undergone this serious attacks at the end of the day. What does that mean? That this person has actually been very prone to various political attacks that have actually put him into in a situation where they actually want him to actually lose ground. What does that mean at the end of the day? It means that Congress has this capability for him to actually rectify whatever is going to come is going to actually rectify whatever chaos or is actually in the system. So he comes and gives you an impact that there's going to be potential backlash from the majority, them being Republicans. And then secondly, he comes and tells you that there is a legal issue that is actually not clearly justified to the public of why this person is supposed to actually go ahead for such an incident that he actually didn't actually engage himself. So what am I going to extend in my speech? First of all, we're going to show you as to how the instigating does not clearly justify the court to actually take such a feeble decision to actually remove Donald Trump. So we come and tell you that for this attack to actually happen, it's Trump who actually just said that, this election is sort of being rigged. What happens is that the supporters go and literally attack the Capitol. That doesn't mean that Trump is the one actually telling these people to actually go ahead and stage it, or him actually being actively into this participation. So what does this mean? At a point in time, once these people are actually expressing their free speech, it led to this great violence. So with such this violence, then you clearly see the whole incident of injuries and accidents. But then what's the impact of this thing? It means that once we have this court decision actually in place, what is going to happen is that utility is going to be drained down the sink. What does that mean? That people are going to actually be handcuffed, and then this is how it actually influences the whole idea of the people voting in Colorado. What does that mean? It means that these citizens are actually infringed their whole idea of choice. I mean, the whole idea of actually political participation. And then what is going to happen is that there is going to be severe backlash at the end of the day. And that's why we think that Colorado's Supreme Court's decision to remove Donald Trump is actually and actually probably not even justified morally, even constitutionally, and that is why we think we are proud to oppose it.
Okay, the House thanks proposition speaker number 2 for that fine speech. May we now invite the second opposition speaker to extend the case of the opposition team. Here.
Am I confirm I'm being heard? May I confirm?
Yes, Jonah, loud and clear.
I audible? Hey, thank you so much. This House opposes Colorado Supreme Court's decision to remove Donald Trump from the state presidential ballot. To understand one thing, that proposition runs a case on the president that Trump was not actively involved or engaged in the January 6th events. Understand two things here: that leaders or political figures are influential people in society. Whether passively or actively they engage in particular things, the kind of choices people make are dependent on what these people preach to them. Understand that people are not going to stand up and maybe say what they call fighting for their rights. People are not going to stand up and fight for the so-called for their rights when Bobby Wine does not call upon the youth to actually go for what they deserve. So that's something that proposition entirely fails to understand. Trump may not have actively engaged in this particular event, but Trump had the kind of influence. Why? Through the kind of hate speeches he gives to the people, through the kind of influence he has on media platforms. Actually, that kind of influence has an impact on the kind of choices people make. So we think then it is important for public or political figures to actually scrutinize the kinds of speech they make. As of first you that Trump in most cases has unrealistic policies. So we think then the Supreme Court has a kind of moral obligation and legal obligation to hold this particular action on Trump or hold him accountable for that particular instance. But then understand two things here. We tell you are going to look at the effectiveness of this policy, effectivity of the kind of the criminal justice system. Secondly, the negative case. So understand that proposition runs duty. What happens when the Supreme Court actually, let's say the Supreme Court of the United States rules Trump out, like does not consider the Colorado kind of Supreme Court decision. So we think two things here. Number one, USA works in a kind of federal government where federal states have particular their kind of legal obligations to do particular things. So we think at a particular point in time where the influences of the decisions or the activities of Trump affect the people Colorado, they actually then have the obligation and legal authority to actually hold him accountable for his kinds of action. So why do we think that sort of accountability is important? We think then that is actually going to uphold demands of the Constitution and the integrity of the United States of America Constitution. At a particular point in time where you deny that, then a country is going to cease to be meaningful in terms of upholding the federal system kind of principles. So at a particular point in time where you deny the ruling of such a court, then it becomes unjustified, the importance of that kind of federal state. But we think, number two, that there is a precedence that the principle is above the law, or no one is above the law. I think Trump has a kind of involvement in this kind of insurrection of January 6th, 2021. So we think then, because the law binds everyone to accountability, then it is morally justified or legally justified for Trump to be held accountable for the actions. Because why? The Constitution stipulates that whoever does that should be punished by law. So the punishment Trump deserves is what then the Colorado Supreme Court then decides on him being ruled out or being left out on the primary kind of presidential ballot. So we think that is a decision worth it, because why? Trump has a kind of influence, affects millions of people whose actually decisions or activities have an impact on the choices particular people make. So the kind of harm that causes, not only to the government but also people at large, is one that then we are not going to side away with in actually determining whether he should be held accountable or not. That is what we tell you from our side. But then we come and tell you here two things. We talk about the effectivity of the criminal justice system. We think defending constitutional integrity, Colorado Supreme Court decision, is rooted in upholding the Constitution and maintaining the integrity process. So we think what the ability, the fundamental principles of democracy, of fairness, and actually treating people the way they deserve. Trump deserves to be punished for the kind of action, because the biggest question is whether he got in that incident. The thing here is that you may not engage or be engaged actively, but there is a kind of passive influence have as politician, that you actually have a kind of large follow-up and fan base. So at a particular point in time where you preach something to the people, their choices are dependent on you actually kind of preaching. So we think then you're eligible to be held accountable. But then number two, we think then the question of accountability for insurrection. The events of January 6th actually amounted to insurrection, and holding individuals accountable for their actually involvement is a kind of necessary step to ensure that those who undermine the democratic process actually have things like consequences, kinds of actually being punished. So what do we think? That is actually going to mold a society that then respects fundamental democratic principles, but secondly, respect the kind of the rulings of the criminal justice system. So the problem we have with side propositions case, number one, is that it is undermining the principles of separation power in the United States. So at a particular point in time where the Supreme Court of the United States rules out this case, then we think that is undermining the principle of separation of power in the United States, or the federal states of the United States. So why is that then inherently dangerous? I think then the kind of federal system that it is going to be actually looked at as irrelevant, because a court cannot make an independent decision even at the federal state level. So at a particular point in time where the Constitution stipulates that punishment for insurrection is a necessity, and then the Supreme Court rules out that, then that undermines the principle of separation of power. Why is it then important to uphold that? Because that is how the governance of the United States I beg to submit.
All right, those thanks opposition 2 for that fine speech. May we now welcome that speaker from proposition side to consolidate the case of the affirmative team. Here.
Okay, may I confirm I'm audible? Forgive me for my voice.
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Okay, cool. Let me set my timer. So, yeah, I'll set my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, understand that as protagonists for constitutional justification, we actually oppose the Supreme Court's decision in order to remove Donald Trump from this state's presidential primary ballot. First of all, I'm going to first clarify something that opposition fails to understand. According to the amendment that happened, and we show you that from our first speech, the difference between instigating versus staging, and of what happened according to the 1999 of how this AI Gory actually his supporters from this requested for justice violently, but they did not storm. Then therefore they then did not hold this AI Gory actually sort of accountable. So with that, what then do we show you from proposition? We tell you that for this constitution, or according to this law, it says for a person who actually staged this. What then do we show you from our speech, from our Jesse's speech to Samari's speech? We tell you that he did not actually stage it. What then does opposition come in and tell you in Jonah's speech? He says that he kind of had this influence when he actually had these hate speeches. But according to the constitution, it doesn't say influence, it says staging. So meaning that from opposition, there's sort of loophole to their to sort of the law that they actually sort of read, yeah. But then secondly, what then do we tell you? That there is sort of by the time you hold a president accountable, which has never happened according even to the 1999, because he was not held accountable, and holding then Donald Trump accountable is not something that you're going to achieve a better world. Why is that then in itself from opposition's case? They tell us that the main key stakeholders are the citizens, but then if you hold him accountable, nothing is going to sort of affect the citizens. Why is that in itself? Okay, fine, he has been removed and they're not going to get the leader that they actually wanted, so meaning that at the end of the day they are being affected majority. Yet from our world, we tell you that this is something that the Supreme Court shouldn't have done. Why? Two things that actually he tells you, but I'm going to again tell you, Chair Panel. He says that actually he should not be removed. Why? Even though he has been removed from this one state, the other republics, he still remains. And at the end of the day, he is going to necessarily win the national elections. What then does that show you? That this Supreme Court's decision is something that cannot be legally justified, and opposition actually fails on that. They actually bring 2 points from the opposition. And this is whereby I drive the points of clash, right? Accountability. They tell us that they want to actually hold him accountable because he has this unrealistic politics that he has actually brought in during his time of him being a president in USA. Then they do not justify to us or show us how these unrealistic politics have then affected people in the long run. So meaning that they present to us nice points, but they do not elaborate or show us the impact. So that is something that, Chair, you cannot clearly credit them for. But then what then do we tell you from our case? And how accountability is even more achieved from our case? We tell you that there is sort of going to be backlash from people. What then does that that looks like when you actually hold him accountable, or when you remove him from this state's presidential primary ballot, people are going to feel bad. What then does this lead you to? This leads to impact, people might not even necessarily vote because they feel like the leader that they actually support is someone that has been removed. Then what then that this look like? Democracy is then being affected in the long run in the state or in the US. And then we clearly show you what US's interest or dynamics of politics looks like, which opposition clearly fails to show us from their first speech. But then secondly, they talk about Hilter, how he was actually held accountable for what he was. But we're telling you that actually Donald Trump did not do anything bad. Everyone has a freedom of choice to speak whatever they feel like. And at a point whereby he felt like Biden becoming a president was through sort of a manipulation and all that stuff that he did not necessarily win. That's what he went in and told his supporters, and his supporters went in to support their president that they actually preferred. So there is no way that actually you removing him is something that you're going to hold him accountable. But in the long run, you're going to in fact affect then the sort of the voting process of these individuals. But then secondly, what then do we come in and tell you? That was the biggest point of clash is accountability. But then secondly, why does then opposition lose today's debate? First of all, there are loopholes from their case, and they do not show us the mechanism and the impact, which necessarily cannot be credited in today's debate. But then thirdly, they fail to understand that removing him from one state then doesn't mean that he has been removed from the whole president's ballot in the whole of US, right? That's also one thing that they fail to understand. Then back to each speaker's points, right? So what then our first speaker come in and tell you? He talks about the political manipulation that is going to happen and how Trump has actually been affected, that people have actually affected his home, his sons and all that stuff. Now removing him from this state's presidential primary ballot is something that necessarily the Supreme Court cannot actually like pass on. Why is that then in itself something that is bad? Because he wasn't like sort of involved, as opposition says that he was influenced, but he did not then actually like stage this. So there is no way you're going to actually like remove him from this. But then secondly, backlash. What does the backlash look like when society doesn't accept the Supreme Court? That opposition comes in and tells us that this is going to undermine sort of like the Supreme Justice. Then this doesn't stand for their case. Why is that? This Supreme Court's decision is something that is not even necessarily justified, and we cannot say that the attack that these people actually did is something that looks like the insurrection, right? So then what does this lead us to? This leads us that whatever they pass is something that is not justified by law. So then this looks like actually they have done something that is incorrect, rather than them telling us from opposition bench that, you know what, this is going to be sort of a deterrent to people. No, this is not going to be a deterrent. Why is that this is not going to be a deterrent? Because in the long run, what happens is people are go and keep fighting. So with that, we show you that opposition doesn't then show you the impact of or how actually like the loopholes from their case have been then sort of filled. So I want to rest my case by saying that there is a difference between staging and instigating, which opposition fails to show. Then on those three comparatives that I show you between proposition's case and opposition, we clearly stand a high chance to win this debate. With that, I beg to rest my case.
All right,
Okay.
the House thanks proposition speaker number 3 for that fine speech. May we now welcome the last opposition speaker to consolidate the case of the opposition team. Yeah.
Okay. I want to confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're
Am I
loud and
audible?
clear. Yes, you're loud and clear.
So I will begin my speech at the count of 3, 2, 1. This entire debate, one thing that the proposition part of the government does not really understand is the fact that the United States is definitely a very influential country, as we clearly told you in our first speech. We clearly told you that the United States, being a very influential country, it is a country that needs a sound leader, a leader who is definitely supposed to be in this kind of office. And with all these ongoing things like storming the Capitol, we don't really see the reason why Trump is supposed to become a leader of the United States. And on top of that, as much as they definitely really come up and in a long run inform us of the attacks of the political manipulation, like the attacks that are definitely happening on Trump, they should really understand that we clearly came up and we told them that because of his stupid policies are coming in a way that he is like storming the Capitol. Since he's definitely trying to stop the Capitol, what is going to make these people try to do these kind of attacks? Because of the fact that he himself is the problem. So we are trying to solve the problem of Trump in this kind of case, which the proposition part of the government does not really necessarily understand. 2, there is that legal issue to stop him from contesting. They come and they tell us that there is no legal issue that is going to stop him from contesting. But Pano, we should really come and drive it back to our first speech. We should remember that we told you that his very dangerous speech that he's definitely giving and putting fire into the people is the reason why we are definitely seeing the coming of the storming of the Capitol. As much as he was not really directly influenced, as we clearly told you in the first, in our second speech, but the fact that he did so, the fact that he's putting fire into these people is the reason why we are definitely seeing that there is the coming up of this kind of things. And we're definitely seeing, like, giving an example of Adolf Hitler that we told you in our first speech. Since Adolf Hitler was able to be sanctioned because of the fact that he put fire into the people, as much as he was not really directly into it, but because of the fact that he's the one who's definitely using his influence to go into the people, we are saying that there is no reason why we're supposed to allow Trump to definitely continue with this. They also come up and they told us that they are encouraging on people's rights. That's what they definitely came up and they told us on their second speech. But as much as they're definitely encouraging on people's rights, we should really understand that there is what we call the need for a sound leader. The need for a sound leader in a way that we need good leaders, because the United States is not only just a country, it is a very influential country that is definitely influencing the whole world and politics. So if someone like Donald Trump influence people and put fire in them to definitely storm the Capitol, what else could he do more than that? So we're definitely saying that the reason why this, the system is definitely justified is because of the fact that Donald Trump is the problem of himself. So the biggest clash point that we meet in this case is accountability, whereby Trump is not, whereby they claim that Trump is not to blame, and on the side of the government, we are saying that Trump is to claim. Let me show you how we definitely win this clash. They clearly come up and they tell us that as much as he definitely gave the speech, he's not to blame, but we should really understand this from the context. what speech did he give? He definitely gave a speech that was definitely putting fire into this kind of people, a speech that was definitely driving these people and put them out of their place. Putting them into the place really clearly meant that they were definitely really supposed to go and begin doing such kinds of things. So definitely means that if he was the one who talked to these people to an extent that they were able to go and attack, do like a storm into the capital, it definitely really shows you that this is a person who's not supposed to be in this kind of office. As much as they come up and they tell us that Trump is definitely achieving the social contract, whereby they even come up and they tell us in their first speech that 60% of all the public is definitely in favor of Trump. But we should really understand that this is not about the election on the social contract. It is the election on what type of a potential leader do we need for the United States? United States, as we have already clearly told you, that it is a country that is definitely really a big country that can influence political and social development of all these other countries. So that's why you're definitely saying in our kind of case that Trump is not supposed to be in these things because of the fact that he is himself a problem. If he's able to definitely influence all these other countries, they will do this. So what do we come and we tell you in our case? We come and we tell you that we come and we tell you about how no one is above the law. We come up and we show you that as much as Trump is definitely trying to put fire, no one is above the law. By the time he's able to come up and he puts fire into the people to an extent that they definitely encroach on the capitalism, why should we definitely accept him? Because he's definitely already breaking the laws. As much as they definitely come up and they tell us that none of these things have been definitely been justified, but we're definitely showing you that there is no smoke without fire. By the time he's definitely being blamed into this, and he's definitely speaking to these people to an extent that they're able to do this, it definitely means that he's definitely supposed to be blamed. And on top of that, we come and we tell you that if there is no punishments, this will create a loophole in the justice. So we should definitely really understand that the criminal justice is something that we really need to keep safe. So if something like this that is definitely being taken place, we should really understand that Donald Trump, if we definitely accept him, definitely continue this, we shall be putting a loophole in the criminal justice. As I've clearly said, Donald Trump is definitely involved in a lot of cases. They have really even clearly said it in their first speech. As much as these cases are not yet they are not yet confirmed, or they have not yet been ruled to say that Donald Trump is definitely supposed to be doing is in this direction, as they've really clearly told us in their first speech. But they should really definitely understand that by the time he is being sued, by the time there are cases that are being discussed about him, definitely makes him a problem himself. Just that itself shows you that Donald Trump does not qualify to become the president of the United States once again, because of the fact that he himself is already having problems. As they've clearly even told us in their first speech that he's being involved in a lot. And all these attacks are definitely from the diplomats. So, but we should really understand that these are the diplomats who are definitely in the favor of the things that are definitely going into the country. The people who are definitely really who want to see something that is definitely really good for the United States. So if the diplomats are definitely really against Donald Trump, it definitely really means that Donald Trump is not supposed to be in this kind of argument. Why shouldn't he be in this? The reason why he's not supposed to be in this is because all the way from it's definitely a problem. Thank you so much for that. I would like to conclude my speech.
All right, the House thanks opposition speaker number 3 for that fine speech. May we now welcome a replied speech from the opposition team. I think it's going to be for 3 minutes since you guys have been using 6 minutes of substantive speech. So, replied speech from the opposition team. Guys, do we have any member of the opposition team here to give the replied speech?
Excuse me, sir. Is it random or first or second speaker?
No, sir, it's supposed to be the first or second speaker. I see neither of them on the call. Sure.
I don't think there's a problem with her giving also the reply speech. It's just a Spar anyway. So I think it's okay.
Okay, so I will be giving the reply speech in 3, 2, One, the biggest thing that is definitely standing in this debate is called accountability. The biggest question tonight's debate was trying to answer is, who is held accountable? Is Trump really not supposed to become a president, or is not really supposed to become a president? On the other side of the government, they come up and they tell us that Trump is not to blame for the storming of the Capitol, in a way that he was not elected really doing into these things. But we should really understand that as a leader, by the time a leader says something, with their influence and with the kind of influence that Trump, the fact that he was even a former president, it means that he already has influence, as we clearly told you. So by the time he comes up and he definitely says something, it definitely puts fire into the people. This fire is the reason why we are seeing the encroach into the capital. That's the biggest thing that the proposition part of the government does not really understand. As much as they definitely come up and they show us that they are achieving the social contract in a way that 60% of the people are in support of Trump, as they clearly come up and they tell us in their first speech. But on top of that, as much as 60% of the people are definitely supporting in their first speech, we should really note that on top of all those things that the people are already in support, we should really understand that the United States is definitely a very influential country, influencing world economics, politics, and social life of almost the whole world. So it definitely means that if the United States is having a reckless president, it definitely means that it is putting the entire world at stake. As they clearly come up and they told us in their first speech, they told us that Trump is definitely involved in a lot of cases, as much as they have not yet been ruled out. By the time they file all those cases against him, it definitely shows you that he himself is a problem, because we all understand that there is no smoke without fire. So by the time they come up and they put up all those things against him, it definitely shows you that there is something wrong with him. That's why I'm definitely saying that the United States being such an influential country and being on top of this world, we don't really see a reason why it is supposed to be having a leader like Trump. As much as they definitely come up and they inform us of the fact that we are encroaching the rights of the people to vote, as much as they come up and they tell us that there is the legal issue there is no legal issue of stopping Trump, as much as they even come up and they tell us that we are encroaching on these rights. But they should really understand that what we are doing is in favor of the whole of America and even the whole world at large. If Trump definitely comes into position, as we have already said, everything that is happening, by the time someone is even able to influence these people to stop the Capitol, it definitely means that he can do even more other worse things. So they're definitely saying that we need a sound leader, as we clearly told you in our first speech. And on top of that, this will be infringing on the criminal justice. As we clearly told you, the criminal justice, it not coming up with this kind of decision, it means that it is not going to have played its role. It is supposed to be playing in its role because of the fact that Trump has been having a lot of questions. There has been a lot of things that have definitely been coming about Trump and all these cases. So by the time they are already there, even if they are not yet proven, even if they are not on what, that means that he's already a problem himself. They even come up and they inform us of how he's being attacked. But we should really understand that what type of people are attacking Trump? He's being attacked by the diplomats. They even clearly said it by themselves. By the time the diplomats come up and they attack Trump, it definitely shows you that Trump is already a problem himself, because we don't really understand that diplomats are the people who are definitely really interested in seeing the free will of people. By the time they definitely come up and they encourage on Trump and they say that, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for that fine speech. May we now welcome the government reply to end the debate.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So I think the problem with opposition on this side is that they didn't understand my context and framing in the first place. I don't think this debate is about whether Trump should be held accountable for his past actions or whether he should not be allowed to run, because either way I've shown you in my first speech that he will eventually be able to run. But we are specifically looking at Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and whether the Supreme Court of the Colorado instituting it is justified or not. That is what this debate was specifically about. And I think that's where opposition screwed it. I think the first thing is two clashes, accountability and legal issues. I think the first thing about accountability is that speaker is a bit contradictory, because she comes and tells you that, yes, Trump's things have not been proven guilty, they are just allegations. But then I think that now contradicts the whole point of their thing about accountability, because why are you demanding for accountability on something that hasn't been proven? I think that's one thing that they have not understood. But I think the second thing that I want to talk about is that the fact that they didn't engage at all in our first argument about political manipulation. Why is this failure crucial? Because once a decision is based on anything political, then it means it's a wrong premise for you to base your decision as a court. Meaning your whole system, your whole criminal justice system is undermined on their side, because your decisions are made based on a political manipulation and not because he's actually justified to receive that thing. The third thing I want to talk about accountability is how they did not, even in their best case scenario, let's look at their best case scenario whereby let's assume that this whole thing, he's held accountable or he's not refused. Either way, there's still two things. They still didn't engage in the fact that Congress will still ratify this because they have a majority in the Congress. But secondly, they didn't engage in the fact that he'll still run for office anyway because it's only one state, meaning the whole issue of accountability and refusing him to go for office is still null and void. So on the issue of accountability, opposition side cannot win. The second clash is about the issue of legal issues, and that's where the debate is won and lost. The whole thing about proposition was telling you the difference between influence and staging. That specific amendment makes this thing only to be justified if the person directly staged an insurrection or a rebellion. And we have shown you from all the three speeches that Donald Trump did not stage it. We do concede that his hate speeches instigated it, but the mere fact that he did not stage this, like I gave you examples of Al Gore in 1999, how he instigated a rebellion that wouldn't be as bad as Trump. But the mere fact that he didn't stage it, it means that the legal premises of staging this kind of punishment are wrong. What that means is that legally, as I told you in your first speech, we have proven to you that it is not justified. The second thing is that in my context, I showed you what an insurrection looks like, what it should look like, a violent uprising against the government. This was a demand for their speeches or for their voices to be heard, which means an insurrection is not justified on their side because it wasn't like that, which means we have proven to you, one, accountability is not there, but secondly, that it was not legally justified. It is a clear prop win.
All right, the House thanks the speakers for this lovely round. I think I'll retire for like 5 minutes to go through my notes again. Then I'll be back with your feedback in the next 5 minutes. I think that will be 8 minutes past 6.
Look who we are the dreamers. We make it happen, 'cause we can see it. It's to the ones that keep the passion. Respect, oh yeah. It's to the ones that can imagine. Respect, oh yeah. Gather round now, look at me. Respect and love the only way. If you wanna come, come with me. The door is open every day. This 1 + 2 random.
All right, guys, I'm back with your OA. I just want to confirm whether I'm audible enough.
Look who we are the dreamers. We make it happen.
Can anyone just unmute?
We believe it.
Yes,
All
you're
right.
audible.
Just a quick roll call. I think I can see all three speakers from the opposition team on call. Do we have the opposition speakers on call? Or Prosper can just take the OA for the rest of the team.
Yes, we are here.
All right, so this is how my OA is going to proceed. First, general feedback. Secondly, the call. And then lastly, I'm basically going to explain the call. That is how my OA is going to proceed. Just give me a few minutes. All right, so I think let's begin right away. First, general feedback. I think this was a good round. It was slightly above average, but then there are a lot of things that we could do and a lot of things that we need to drop and maybe a few strategies that we can adopt going forward. So first, on general feedback, I'll generally tell you what I thought the debate was about or what generally I expected or thought the speakers could do better. First, I think it was rightly stated by Reimer. If you are supposed to debate an opposition motion, that is to say, if you're opposing something, a policy or any other subject that you're debating upon, you need to have like that metric of valuation, right? You need to tell us what you're going to be basing on to either oppose or support that particular stuff. So I think it was a normal consensus. You basically support something when it's in the best interest of the people, or basically support something when it's justifiable, or basically you support something that is legal based on what the particular circumstance is. So I don't think that was a general debate, and I don't think that was a point of contest. That is to say, whether it determine who wins or loses the debate. But then secondly, on some particular stuff, one, I think that this debate generally needed you guys to prove two things. One, the first is the moral legitimacy of this decision. That is the principal aspect of the debate. That means the first thing I required you guys to do was to debate whether this decision was inherently, whether it was right to basically pass this decision. And I think you can basically do it on two ways. Generally, also going back to the discussion that has been happening on social media and all those other stuff. The first way you can prove the moral legitimacy of the decision or the moral illegitimacy of the decision is one, questioning the legitimacy of the provision in and of itself. That is to say, you're basically going to inquire whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment Act is basically something that rhymes with the constitutionality of, let's say, the Constitution of America in and of itself. I'll bring you back to the aspect that there are a lot of things which was under Ugandan law and they were repealed based on the fact that they were unconstitutional. So that means in and of itself, you can basically question the constitutionality of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment Act. I'll basically bring a comparison with the sedition provision that was in the Penal Code of Uganda. I think Section 50 of the Penal Code by then talked about the offense of sedition. And in one of the court cases that happened in Uganda, the Constitutional Court ruled it illegitimate, as in to say it was basically unconstitutional, based on the fact that it was inconsistent with the provision on the freedom of expression. So I think the first way you could approach the principal part of this motion was to question whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment Act is basically consistent with the principles of democracy and with the general foundation of the Constitution of the United States, which we all agree it's to promote democracy, it is also to promote liberty. That means one of the things which could come very handy in this kind of motion is the debate on the freedom of expression. That is to say, was Trump basically allowed to basically express himself the way he did? And I think that particularly came well from Jesse and a bit from Onenrwot. Yeah, so basically, you could have hinged more on questioning the legitimacy of that specific provision. The second way you could question the legitimacy of this decision was to basically question the legal premise of the decision itself. That is to say, you are basically going to ask yourself whether the occurrence of the 6th January 2021 basically amounted to an insurrection. That is the second thing I wanted to say in this debate. I think when we are debating motions, we need to basically determine what the major focal point is. And as debaters, at some point we have to be daring and we have to basically take the hard line. For example, by saying first, we don't think the provision is constitutional, but then secondly, we do not think that the actions of Donald Trump amounted to an act of insurrection. And again, I think this came quite clearly from Jesse in the first and in the replied speech, but I didn't get any like capitalization of it from the second and third speeches consequently. So those are the two ways in which you can basically debate the moral legitimacy of this decision. First, by questioning the legitimacy of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment Act, but then secondly, by questioning the legal premise of the decision itself. That is to say, whether the actions of 6th January 2021 amounted to an insurrection. The second thing, which I generally think you guys did well in this motion, is basically to prove the impact of this decision. So that means necessarily you need to show us what impact happens. You need to also show us why it is more likely to happen. And basically, you have to show us why it is bad. But then lastly, you have to show us why it is bad on a comparative. I'll basically explore more on this in my deliberation and in justifying whatever happened. The third thing is you guys need to basically embrace the aspect of causation and criminal responsibility. Even if the question is about staging something, what does it mean to basically stage something? Does it mean you have to be on ground holding placards or basically throwing stones at the police, or just incitement and basically basically giving people the right motivation to actually go and do stuff is also amounting to criminal responsibility? This is something that I think if we embrace ourselves, we could be in position to have a really elaborate and well analyzed discussion. So my verdict, I think this debate was won by the opposition team, and I'll basically explain why. I'll repeat again, this debate was won by the opposition team, and I'll basically explain why. So first, we are going to weigh up the chart on criminal responsibility. That is to say, whether Trump actually participated in this particular insurrection or whether he actually staged this insurrection. The reason why this weigh up becomes very important is because the question on Trump's criminal responsibility was basically a hot contest in this debate. Proposition team was saying Trump did not stage it, so the decision was illegal. Opposition team was saying Trump actually staged it, and this is why he basically has to pay for his sins. Basically, they were saying nobody's above the law and stuff like that. So moving into that particular chart right away. The logic from the proposition team is that, you see, there is a difference between inciting something and staging something. Opposition team comes and tells you, because Trump basically incited people, right, to basically to go into that aspect of insurrection means that it basically had some criminal responsibility. The balance on that is that in defining whether you have staged something, right, it is not only limited to whether you basically undertook some sort of active responsibility. That is to say, you basically went on ground and you are basically throwing stones. The idea here is that for criminal responsibility to actually be staged, you have to have some sort of let's say substantive contribution to whatever happened in and of itself. That is to say, the question at the end of the day is to understand whether Trump's action contributed to people basically going on ground. So at the end of the day, whether the question is inciting or staging, for Trump to have criminal responsibility, both teams needed to show whether what Trump did contributed to people going there and contributed to people, let's say, trying to subvert the constitution or trying to delay the process in the counting of the electoral college votes and stuff like that. Ideally, if as a judge, I'm supposed to be, let's say, what do we call it? An average thinking person. Now, as an average thinking person, if one of the teams is able to prove to me that what Trump did, for example, the hate speeches and all those other stuff, was motivation enough for people to actually go into that aspect of insurrection, then that means that side necessarily proves that Trump had criminal responsibility. And that is why I thought that particular clash was settled in the negative. That is to say, Trump basically had some sort of criminal responsibility because his hate speeches and his call out of the electoral process saying that it was rigged or it was fraudulent basically incited people to necessarily go and attack the US Capitol. So at that point, I think Trump basically had some sort of criminal responsibility. The other idea, which was some sort of contention, is on the idea of political manipulation. And I think this was a very good point from Jesse, because Jesse comes and tells you that, you see, all this decision was based on political manipulation. That is to say, anything that is based on political manipulation is basically based on the wrong premise. That is necessarily to say that it is illegal. The problem with this kind of analysis is it doesn't necessarily explain why Trump should be absolved of all liability. This is to clarify the things on two grounds. Yes, it could be that anything politically motivated is illegal, but then it does not mean that because it was politically motivated, it means Trump is innocent. On the other side of the coin, if the opposition team is still able to prove to you through their analysis that Trump is not innocent, even when this stuff is actually politically motivated, that means the decision is right and the decision is not illegal. And this is where Reimer's analysis basically comes handy. She first of all tells you something which I thought was generally relevant on the idea of stupid policies. I don't think this was enough to basically consider even who wins this debate. But then what she does material is she tells you that there are existing evidence that show that Trump is basically guilty of insurrection. And I think this basically counters the aspect of political manipulation, because ideally, the point to prove legality or the point to prove the justifiability of this decision is on whether Trump is basically guilty of this particular aspect or not. So ideally, even if there was some manipulative tendencies or some sort of intention to make Trump lose some sort of ground, if opposition team are able to prove to you that, you see, Trump is criminally responsible and that there is evidence to show that Trump violated Section 3 of the Fourth Amendment, it necessarily proves to you that the decision that they actually passed was legal, based on the idea of evidence and what have you. The other argument that basically comes in the last 10 seconds of Jesse's speech is on the idea of legal impacts. Basically, this is where I thought the debate was supposed to be, and I thought this was where proposition team would have actually won this debate. It comes clearly from the replied speech. Jesse tells you that, you see, first of all, there is no legal evidence or there is no material proof that what Trump did basically amounted to insurrection. But they also basically tell you that, you see, this was the Republicans exercising their freedom of expression at the end of the day. What cannot make that argument be substantive enough to basically win tonight's debate is because, one, it lacked mechanization from the second and third speeches, but then secondly, it looked like an entirely dropped argument from the second and third speakers. That is to say, Jesse mentions it in his 10 seconds of speech. He actually assures us that Sam Rawit is going to explain more on it, but I don't get any sort of extension on that particular argument. The way I think this argument could have been really very strong is if you were to prove the illegal or the legal impacts, you are necessary to prove what I said in the general feedback. That is to say, you are supposed to prove that this provision, first of all, is unconstitutional because it contravenes with the freedom of expression. That is, okay, like outside of this debate, that is the kind of general discussion that is happening on Twitter and everywhere else, as to whether these people were exercising their freedom of speech by calling out what they thought was a fraudulent election. That is to say, here you're not supposed to balance the idea of freedom of expression and speech versus the constitutionality or upholding the principle of this particular constitution. So I thought this argument could basically be mechanized on two aspects. First is to prove that the provision is not constitutional, but then secondly, to prove that maybe Trump's the occurrence of the 6th January 2021 did not amount to any sort of insurrection at the end of the day. That is the chat that basically happened from proposition side. The other reason why I think then the opposition team wins tonight's debate is because they're able to prove to you two aspects, which were generally aspects on common sense, but they win because they were not substantially engaged. First of all is the effectivity or the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. Jesse calls this out by telling us that this debate is not about the criminal responsibility or the accountability of Donald Trump. But then this is what Jonathan says, and I think this is also still material to this debate. Jonathan comes and tells you that there is an inherent need to uphold the principle of the Constitution. That is necessarily to make sure that the Constitution is there to punish those who deserve punishment and to protect those who need protection, even where those people cannot necessarily protect itself. I think this actually comes very handy because from the first week, Reimer comes and tells you that, you see, Trump is guilty and Trump needs to be punished. The extension that comes from Jonathan's speech, which then makes the idea of the effectivity of the criminal justice system important, because they tell you that when they do this, or when they uphold the Constitution, or when they support the decision of the Colorado court, it means that they're upholding the constitutionality principle. That is to say, punishment for whoever deserves punishment. Secondly, they come and tell you that it is a necessity to defend the integrity of the Constitution. What they actually come and tell you is, if you oppose this particular provision of the law, or you oppose this particular decision that was passed by the Colorado court, what you will be doing is you will be sort of slapping the Constitution in the face. You will be sort of insulting the Constitution, or you'll be violating the Constitution at the end of the day. This also substantiates Reimer's argument, which she says, if you don't support this kind of decision, or if you oppose this kind of decision, it necessarily means people will lose the trust in the criminal justice system because the principle of constitutionality will have been broken. Therefore, I thought the idea of defending the integrity of the Constitution is actually very material, because at a point in time where they argue that Trump is guilty, it means that he has to basically face the wrath of the law. And I think this is why this principle is also worth considering in this debate. Otherwise, I gave this debate to the opposition team because generally they were consistent, but then secondly, they were able to prove that Trump was responsible for this insurrection. Secondly, they were able to prove that, you see, there is need to uphold the principle of the Constitution and to maintain the general confidence in the Constitution. What I thought the proposition team would have done better, right, is first of all to prove more than proving why political manipulation basically nullifies this kind of decision. I expected them necessarily to prove why Trump is not guilty, but then why this is particularly only and primarily based on political manipulation. The second thing which I expected them to prove, and which I generally thought would give them a better chance of winning this debate, is on expanding further, or even I could say basing 60% of their debate on the legal impacts or the legality of this particular decision in and of itself. Other than this, this is generally why I thought the debate was won by the opposition team. And I think for more personal feedback, you could probably DM me at any point. I'll be happy to help. So that is it. Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, I'm listening.
So do you mind if you tell us like where we failed on speaker roles, all the speaker totals, like what you generally thought, because this is also quite important.
Come again?
I would like you to inform us on like the speaker roles, because as much as we have won the debate, we would like to know whether A1 did really all the speaker roles, A2, like even the negative part, all the way to the third speech, even the reply speech, so that at least we can know which speaker role we failed to play, because entirely we are winning on the arguments, but we would also like to know the speaker roles.
All right, I think this debate, okay, I think by saying that I thought this debate was slightly above average means that the small things like speaker roles, you guys played it well. I think there were very good setups from both of the first speakers. Jesse did well, Rima did well. I think the second speakers also quietly did well, except I think Samrawit could take a little more classes on extending debates and basically trying to expound more on the arguments that were raised by the speaker. I think also what she could do better is to improve on the quality of our engagement. But also, okay, this is something that I forgot to mention in general feedback. Um, Opposition team narrowly got away with the argument of Trump is guilty and the Constitution is right, simply because proposition team did not question the legality of Section 3 of the Fourth Amendment Act. That is to say, if you met a very daring debater who decided to say that yes, the Constitution may have the Constitution may convict Donald Trump, but we don't think that constitutional provision is legal in the first place. Then, from side opposition, it then becomes not enough to simply assert that those who violate the Constitution should be punished. You have to move an extra mile in showing us why that particular constitutional provision is right and is worth protecting based on the principle of constitutionalism. So I think that is something that second speakers can also embrace, adding more layers to the argument and basically impacting and mechanizing arguments more. So basically, that is it. Second speakers, I think they did great. Third speakers, your rebuttals were okay. Your way up were also fairly okay. So generally, I think the reason why largely my OA is on the content of the debate is because you guys fairly did well on speaker roles. That's all I can say. For more personal feedback, you can feel free to reach out to me on WhatsApp anytime.